Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session on clinical research. I'm excited to introduce you to our topic, which is focused on the latest guidelines and regulations. On this slide, you'll see the title, Clinical Research Introduction to, along with references to the key regulatory bodies and guidelines we will be discussing. We'll explore the revised NDCT rules of 2019, along with standards set by CDSCO and ICMR. Throughout this presentation, we'll cover new drugs and clinical trial rules, the role of ICMR, good clinical practice, and the regulatory framework under Indian guidelines. So, let's get started and dive into the essentials of clinical research within the Indian regulatory landscape. Let's explore what clinical research really involves. At its core, clinical research is about systematically investigating human participants to generate solid scientific evidence. It plays a crucial role in advancing medicine and improving patient care. There are different types of clinical research, and understanding these helps us see how each contributes to medical progress. First, we have translational research, which bridges basic science discoveries, like laboratory findings, with actual clinical applications. Think of it as translating lab results into real-world treatments. Next is observational research. This type collects data without changing or interfering with the participant's normal care. It's about observing and gathering information, which helps us understand how diseases behave or how treatments work in everyday settings. Then we have interventional research, where researchers actively introduce new drugs, devices, or procedures under controlled conditions. This is often how new treatments are tested before they become standard practice. It's important to note that these activities are guided by ethical principles, such as those outlined in the ICMR National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research from 2017, ensuring participant safety and integrity throughout the process. So, in summary, clinical research involves systematic investigation involving people or human material, aiming to generate reliable scientific evidence that can improve health outcomes. Let's take a closer look at the key regulatory bodies involved in Indian clinical research. First, we have the Drugs Controller General of India, or DCGI, the head of CDSCO, who is responsible for signing off on permissions for new drug clinical trial applications, specifically using Form CT04. This step is crucial because it ensures that any new drug being tested in India meets the necessary regulatory standards before moving forward. Next, we have the Institutional Ethics Committee, or IEC, also known as IRB in some contexts. This committee is responsible for formulating ethical guidelines and shaping national health research policies. They also issue the NEGBR 2017 guidelines, which focus on good clinical practices and ethical standards for research. Moving on, the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, serves as the primary national regulatory body under the Directorate General of Health Services, part of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. ICMR's role is to approve all clinical trials involving new drugs and medical devices, ensuring that research is conducted responsibly and ethically across the country. Finally, the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, or CDSCO, oversees the entire regulatory landscape for clinical research in India. It acts as the overarching authority, ensuring that all these bodies work in harmony and that the guidelines are consistently applied. Together, these organizations form a comprehensive regulatory landscape that guides, supervises, and ensures the ethical conduct of clinical research in India. Understanding how they interact is essential for navigating the complex process of bringing new drugs and devices to the Indian market. Let's start by looking at some recent updates in clinical research regulations. First, there's now a separate chapter specifically for BA/BE studies, and importantly, sites conducting these studies must be registered with the CDSCO. This helps streamline the process and ensure quality standards are maintained. Moving on to bioequivalence studies, we've introduced a simplified pathway, especially beneficial for academic institutions like IITs and AIIMS, making it easier and faster to conduct these trials. In terms of academic research, there's now a mandatory requirement for compensation in cases of serious adverse events, such as death or permanent disability, calculated using the CDSCO formula. This underscores the importance of participant safety and accountability. Regarding the waiver of local trials, the CDSCO has the authority to waive Phase I to III trials for certain drug categories if there is enough foreign data available. This can significantly reduce the time and cost involved in bringing new drugs to market. India now also has the capability to participate simultaneously in global clinical trials, which opens up new opportunities for collaboration and faster development of innovative treatments. When it comes to approval timelines, the process has been made quicker. Academic and Phase III trials now have a timeline of just 30 working days, while global trials can be approved within 90 days. Finally, these updates are part of the broader introduction to the Indian Guidelines for Clinical Research, which have replaced Schedule Y of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940. These reforms, under the new Drugs and Clinical Trials Rules of 2019, aim to make India a more attractive and efficient hub for clinical research while maintaining high standards of safety and integrity. Let's walk through the different phases of clinical trials as outlined here. Starting with Phase 0, or microdosing, this is an exploratory stage where we administer very small doses, less than 1% of the pharmacological dose, primarily to gather initial data. Interestingly, in India, this phase isn't always required. Next, we have Phase I, often called the first-in-human phase. Here, we work with a very small number of subjects, usually fewer than 10. The main goal is to assess safety, tolerability, and pharmacokinetics, or how the drug moves through the body. Moving on to Phase II, which is more focused on proof of concept. We typically enroll between 20 to 80 participants. This phase evaluates safety further, but also looks at efficacy, dosing, and short-term safety, specifically in the target patient population. Then comes Phase III, involving a larger group of 100 to 300 subjects. This is pivotal for confirming the drug's efficacy, determining the optimal dose, and monitoring safety on a broader scale. The data from this phase are critical for regulatory approval, like the NDA or new drug application, especially here in India with the CDSCO. Finally, we have the post-marketing surveillance, or Phase IV. This phase involves thousands of people and continues after the drug is on the market. It focuses on long-term safety, exploring additional indications, and pharmacovigilance activities to ensure ongoing safety and effectiveness. All these phases follow the sequential development pathway guided by the CDSCO and ICH E8 guidelines, ensuring a structured approach to bringing safe and effective medicines to patients. Let's walk through some of the key aspects of conducting multi-site clinical trials. First, it's important to note that these trials follow the same protocol across all participating sites, ensuring consistency and reliability in the data collected. The sponsor plays a crucial role here, as they are responsible for the investigational medicinal product, or IMP, and for monitoring the trial's progress to ensure compliance and safety. Before starting, the trial protocol must be reviewed and approved by an independent ethics committee or institutional review board, which helps protect the rights and safety of participants. Throughout the trial, compliant quality assurance systems are implemented to maintain high standards and integrity of the study. The manufacturing of investigational products must adhere strictly to Good Manufacturing Practice Standards, or GMP, to ensure quality and safety. Protecting the confidentiality of all records and the identities of study subjects is paramount, safeguarding their privacy at all times. All information generated during the trial must be recorded, handled, and stored accurately to ensure data integrity. Every participant must provide voluntary, written informed consent, understanding the nature of the study and any potential risks. Medical decisions related to the participants can only be made by qualified physicians, emphasizing the importance of expert oversight. The trial must be conducted according to an approved protocol and with IEC approval, ensuring ethical and scientific validity. It's essential that the trial is scientifically sound, with a clear and detailed protocol that guides every step. Before starting, we need to have sufficient preclinical and clinical data to justify the trial, ensuring it is based on solid scientific grounds. Throughout the process, the rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects are always our top priority. Overall, these principles from the Indian Guidelines and ICH-GCP E6 R2 help us maintain high standards of ethical conduct, quality, and scientific integrity in clinical research. Let's go through the key steps in the informed consent process as outlined in the Indian Guidelines. First, identifying a potential participant is crucial. Once identified, we need to provide an information sheet in the local language, which is mandatory. This ensures the participant understands what the study involves. Next, we give them adequate time to decide. At least 24 hours is recommended, so they can consider their participation carefully. When they're ready, we obtain their written, signed consent. If the participant is illiterate, a witness must also be present during this process. After obtaining consent, we answer all questions the participant might have, ensuring they're fully informed. Finally, a very important requirement is the audio-visual recording of the IC process, especially for vulnerable populations and first-in-human studies, as mandated by the NDCT rule of 2019. We then retain a copy of the consent form with the participant and file the original securely with the site. All these steps help us uphold ethical standards and ensure the participants' rights are protected throughout the clinical research process. Let's review some key points about the Institutional Ethics Committee, or IEC, as outlined in the Indian Guidelines. First, it's important to note that the IEC must conduct initial, periodic, and final reviews of clinical research projects. These reviews are essential to ensure ongoing ethical compliance throughout the study. Additionally, records of these reviews need to be maintained for at least 5 years after the trial concludes, which helps with transparency and accountability. Moving on to the composition of the IEC, a quorum of at least 5 members is required, including the chairperson. The chairperson should ideally be external or non-affiliated with the institution to bring an unbiased perspective. The committee must include various members to cover different viewpoints. A basic medical scientist for scientific review, a clinician for medical and ethical considerations, a legal expert to ensure legal compliance, and a social scientist or NGO representative to represent community perspectives. We also need a lay person or patient advocate to provide the participant's point of view, a nurse or paramedic to address clinical care aspects, and finally, a member secretary from the institution to handle administrative coordination. One important point to remember is that registration of the IEC with the CDSCO using Form EC01 is mandatory. This registration ensures that the committee operates under official oversight and adheres to national standards. Overall, the composition, registration, and functioning of the IEC are guided by the NDCT rules of 2019, ensuring that every clinical research project upholds ethical standards, protects participants, and maintains scientific integrity. Let's walk through the step-by-step pathway for the CT application process in India, as outlined by the NDCT Rules 2019. First, we start with an introduction to clinical research and the Indian Guidelines, which sets the foundation for understanding the entire process. Next, we have the pre-submission meeting, which is optional but highly recommended, where we can clarify any doubts with the CDSCO before submitting our application. Once we're ready, we prepare our CT dossier, ensuring it contains all necessary documents like Form CT04 and annexures. After that, we submit the application online via the CDSCO portal. The review process then begins, and it's important to note the timelines. For a new drug in Phase I or Phase III, the review takes approximately 90 working days each. For academic clinical trials and bioavailability/bioequivalence studies, it's about 30 working days. During this review, the SEC or an expert committee assesses our submission. If everything is in order, permission is granted through Form CT-05, and we can move on to site activation. This includes pre-trial monitoring, which ensures the site is ready for trial conduct. Once approved, we proceed with trial conduct, ongoing safety reporting, and site management throughout the study. This entire pathway helps streamline the process, ensuring safety and compliance while facilitating efficient drug development in India. Let's take a closer look at the reporting timelines for different types of adverse events. For fatal or life-threatening SUSARs, the reporting deadline is 7 days both to the IEC and to the CDSCO, and these need to be reported on an expedited basis. Similarly, non-fatal SUSARs also require reporting within 15 days, again both to the IEC and CDSCO, and they are also classified as expedited reports. For serious adverse events that are not SUSARs, such as SAEs, the reporting window is slightly longer, 14 days for both the IEC and the CDSCO. These are typically reported periodically as part of the annual safety update, called the DSUR. In the case of death due to trial participation, the reporting must be done within 24 hours, and this is considered an expedited process, which may also involve compensation considerations. Regarding the overall summary of all SAEs, these are reported annually to the IEC and included in the DSUR for the CDSCO, making it a periodic reporting requirement. Now, it's important to understand what SUSARs are. These are suspected unexpected serious adverse reactions, meaning they are unexpected, serious, and possibly related to the investigational product. Examples include any adverse event resulting in death, life-threatening situations, hospitalization, disability, congenital anomalies, or medically significant conditions. SAEs, in general, include any serious adverse event, regardless of whether it's a SUSAR or not. Finally, all these reporting requirements are guided by Indian regulations, specifically the NDCT rules of 2019, which emphasize the importance of timely safety reporting to protect trial participants and ensure compliance with regulatory standards. Now, let's look at the key points regarding compensation in Indian clinical research. First, India is among the first countries to codify mandatory compensation into law. Previously, we relied on guidance from the Indian Council of Medical Research, or ICMR, but now this requirement is enshrined in statute, making it a legal obligation. Moving on to the global comparison, the Site Institutional Ethics Committee, or IEC, plays a crucial role. They decide both the causality, whether the injury is related to the trial, and the quantum of compensation. However, the Drugs Controller General of India, CDSCO, has the authority to override these decisions or even direct an enhanced compensation if needed. Regarding medical management, the sponsor is responsible for covering all costs associated with treating any trial-related injuries, regardless of whether the injured participant is awarded compensation separately. This ensures that participant care isn't dependent on the compensation process. In terms of timelines, once the IEC determines causality, the sponsor must pay the compensation within 45 days. Additionally, the CDSCO must be notified within 14 days if there is a serious adverse event or death related to the trial. Now, let's discuss how compensation is calculated. For cases of death or disability, it is based on a formula: age-adjusted factor multiplied by the participant's monthly income and the number of dependent years. This formula was issued by the CDSCO in 2013 and has been updated since. Finally, and very importantly, Rule 23 of the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules of 2019 makes compensation a legal requirement for any serious adverse events related to the trial. This was a significant reform, addressing past controversies and ensuring participant safety and rights are prioritized. So, in summary, these provisions collectively strengthen the legal framework around participant protection in India's clinical research landscape. Let's walk through some of the key responsibilities involved in clinical research, starting with the sponsor. The sponsor plays a central role, overseeing the entire trial process. They are responsible for escalating any issues that come up, ensuring that the trial stays compliant with good clinical practice, or GCP standards, and verifying data accuracy through source data verification, or SDV. They also monitor sites according to the monitoring plan, acting essentially as the agent of the sponsor to ensure everything runs smoothly. Now, the sponsor's responsibilities extend to maintaining detailed records for at least 5 years, which is crucial for regulatory compliance and future reference. Protecting vulnerable populations is a key ethical obligation, and the sponsor must ensure their safety. They also determine compensation for serious adverse events, or SAEs, and approve informed consent forms and other subject materials to make sure participants understand what they're signing up for. The sponsor is involved in the initial and ongoing review of the trial protocol, which is essential for safeguarding participant welfare and scientific integrity. They oversee the Institutional Ethics Committee, or IEC, and IRB approvals as well, supervising all site staff and maintaining the investigator site file. The ISF is part of their role, ensuring proper documentation is in place. Reporting SAEs promptly to both the IEC and the sponsor is critical for safety monitoring. Obtaining and documenting informed consent is a fundamental ethical requirement, and a qualified physician, often the investigator or PI, is responsible for the conduct of the trial at each site. The PI implements pharmacovigilance plans to monitor drug safety and must ensure the investigational medicinal product, or IMP, meets GMP standards for quality. The sponsor may appoint a contract research organization, or CRO, to handle certain responsibilities, but ultimately these duties are transferable. When it comes to regulatory submissions, the sponsor submits IND or NDA applications to the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, CDSCO, in India. They also handle the financial aspects, trial design, and overall oversight, ensuring that the study stays aligned with its objectives. In the context of Indian guidelines and regulations like ICH-GCP E6 and NDCT Rules 2019, understanding these roles and responsibilities helps us appreciate how collaborative and complex clinical research is. Each stakeholder has a vital part to play in ensuring that trials are conducted ethically, safely, and effectively. Let's go through some key fields in CTRI registration. First, you'll need to provide the enrollment status and the date of the first enrollment. It's important to include the IEC approval number and the CDSCO permission number to ensure regulatory compliance. Details about the investigator and the sponsor should also be clearly documented. Additionally, you'll need to specify the phase of the trial, its design, expected outcomes, and eligibility criteria. Don't forget to include the trial's title, its acronym if any, and the scientific title. Now, why are these details important? They help maintain transparency and ensure your trial is properly registered and recognized. Remember, the CDSCO may require the CTRI number on the clinical trial permission, so registration is crucial. All interventional and observational trials must be registered, and for academic trials, it's recommended to register before submitting to the IEC. Ideally, registration should happen prospectively, before enrolling the first participant, to avoid any regulatory issues later on. As for the cost, registration is completely free, which makes it accessible for all researchers. In 2024 alone, over 60,000 trials have been registered, highlighting the reach and importance of CTRI. It's the primary registry in the ICTRP network, under the World Health Organization, and was established back in 2007. Lastly, according to Indian guidelines, registering your trial is mandatory under both CDSCO and ICMR requirements. So, proper registration isn't just a formality, it's an essential part of conducting ethical and compliant clinical research in India. Let's take a closer look at the investigator site file, or ISF, the trial master file, and sponsor files. These are essential documents that must be retained for at least 2 years after the last approval of the marketing application or after formal discontinuation of development, whichever comes later. However, it's important to note that the CDSCO requires a retention period of 5 years, so we need to keep these records accordingly. Now, when we talk about essential documents, guided by ICH E6, there are some key qualities to keep in mind. First, they must be retrievable for inspection, meaning they should be readily accessible. They should also be available and stored on a durable medium that is enduring over time. Matching across documents is crucial for consistency, and there should be no missing data to ensure completeness. Additionally, these documents must be error-free and accurate, reflecting true and correct information. Let's break down some of the specific qualities that make these documents reliable. The first is that they should be the original or the first recording or source of the data. This ensures authenticity. The records must be made contemporaneously, that is, at the time the observation or event occurs, to maintain their integrity. They should be readable and permanent, so the information remains clear over the years. It's also vital to know who collected the data and when. This attributable aspect helps establish accountability. The documents should be legible, so they can be read easily in the future. All these qualities, originality, contemporaneity, readability, and attribution, help ensure the data's integrity and reliability. Finally, understanding these principles is essential in the context of Indian guidelines and the ALCOA Plus principles, which emphasize the importance of good data management and GCP documentation. These standards guide us to maintain high-quality, trustworthy records throughout the clinical research process. Let's talk about some core ethical principles that guide clinical research. First, risk-benefit analysis, IRB oversight, and stopping rules and protocols are essential to ensure participant safety. We need to carefully weigh potential risks against benefits, and institutional review boards, or IRBs, oversee this process to protect participants. Stopping rules help us know when to pause or stop a study if risks become unacceptable. Next, minimizing harm is a top priority. We respect individual autonomy, meaning participants have the right to make informed choices. We also recognize that some individuals may have diminished autonomy, so they require additional protections. Respect for persons involves protecting participant data. This means separating identifiers from data and anonymizing information whenever possible to maintain privacy. Protecting confidentiality is crucial to maintain trust. Fair distribution of benefits and burdens is the principle of justice. We must include vulnerable groups and ensure they are protected while sharing the benefits equitably. Research should ultimately benefit participants or society, with benefits outweighing the risks. This is the principle of beneficence, doing good and maximizing positive outcomes. We also follow the principle of non-maleficence, which is to do no harm. Risks must be minimized and justified by the anticipated benefits to justify exposing participants. Voluntariness emphasizes that participation should always be free and voluntary, without undue influence or coercion. Participants should feel entirely at ease making their decision. Finally, essentiality reminds us that research should be necessary and not just a duplication of existing knowledge. We must justify the need for every study we undertake. These principles form the foundation of ethical clinical research, aligning with the Indian guidelines and the ICMR National Ethical Guidelines of 2017. They help us conduct research responsibly, respecting human dignity and promoting societal trust. Let's go through some important aspects of safeguarding vulnerable groups in clinical research. First, it's key to understand that results are not directly linked to performance, which emphasizes the importance of unbiased recruitment. The IEC, or Institutional Ethics Committee, plays a crucial role by scrutinizing recruitment methods to ensure fairness and transparency. We must also ensure the confidentiality of individuals who choose not to participate, respecting their privacy and autonomy. Additionally, potential undue influence on participants is carefully assessed to prevent coercion or pressure. Now, when it comes to employees or students involved in research, they have the right to withdraw at any point if they object to participation. We also need to conduct capacity assessments at each visit to ensure they understand the study and can make informed decisions. Where possible, we seek the assent of the participant, especially when they are capable of understanding, and always obtain consent from a legally authorized representative if needed. For individuals who are cognitively impaired, monitoring fetal outcomes becomes especially important, and involving an obstetrician is mandatory. We have to carefully evaluate the risks and benefits for both mother and fetus, providing a specific ethical justification for including such vulnerable populations. Pregnant women require age-appropriate language in the informed consent form, ensuring they fully understand what they're agreeing to. The CDSCO waiver is only applicable if the disease is entirely pediatric, meaning there's no adult population affected. For children aged 7 years and above, assent is recommended, recognizing their developing capacity to understand. Parental or guardian consent is mandatory to protect their interests. When working with children under 18, we must implement these safeguards rigorously. Overall, these guidelines, especially under the NDCT Rules 2019 and ICMR Guidelines 2017, aim to protect these vulnerable populations by establishing clear ethical standards. Recognizing and respecting their rights ensures that our research is conducted ethically, responsibly, and with the utmost care for their well-being. Now, let's look at the key aspects of safety monitoring in clinical research according to Indian guidelines. First, when a safety signal is detected, we have a regulatory notification process that typically occurs within 7 to 15 days. This prompt reporting helps ensure that any potential safety issues are addressed quickly. If new safety signals emerge, an urgent protocol amendment may be necessary to update the study procedures and ensure participant safety. We also perform disproportionality analysis for known adverse events, which helps us understand whether certain side effects are occurring more frequently than expected. Meanwhile, ongoing review of case narratives is crucial. It allows us to monitor individual patient data for any emerging safety concerns. When we detect a safety signal, benefit-risk evaluation becomes a key component. This helps us weigh the potential benefits of the investigational product against its risks. All serious adverse events are documented thoroughly in line listings, and these are submitted regularly to regulatory authorities. For example, the IND annual report is submitted every 12 months to the CDSCO, and the Development Safety Update Report, or DSUR, is an annual periodic safety report that gets updated with each regulatory submission. Risk minimization activities are also defined clearly, including safety specifications and the pharmacovigilance plan, which are submitted along with the new drug application. Moving on, the Risk Management Plan, or RMP, is an essential document that outlines how risks will be identified, assessed, and mitigated. This plan is reviewed and approved by the IEC and is mandatory for phase III trials involving serious outcomes. It also recommends whether a trial should continue, be modified, or be stopped altogether based on safety data. To oversee all this, there's the Safety Monitoring Committee, often called DSMB or DMC. This independent body reviews unblinded safety data to ensure participant safety throughout the trial. Overall, this safety monitoring framework, aligned with CDSCO and ICH ETWA guidelines, provides a comprehensive approach to safeguarding participants and maintaining the integrity of our clinical research. In this slide, we're looking at some of the key forms and documents involved in clinical research under Indian guidelines. Each of these plays a vital role in ensuring the safety, compliance, and smooth conduct of clinical trials. For example, the CT04 form is used when applying for permission to conduct a clinical trial, and it's submitted by the sponsor or CRO to the CDSCO. Once approved, the CT05 grants permission for the trial to proceed. If there are any changes to the approved protocol, the sponsor needs to submit a CT06 amendment. Safety reporting is critical, so the SAE report is submitted by the investigator to both the IEC and sponsor, in case of serious adverse events. The IEC registration application, EC01, is submitted by the institution to the CDSCO to ensure ethical oversight. The Form 44 is the application for marketing authorization, allowing the sponsor to market the drug after successful trials. The CTRI registration is important for public transparency, registering the trial with the Clinical Trials Registry India. The DSUR provides an annual safety update from the sponsor to the CDSCO, ensuring ongoing safety monitoring. The investigator's brochure contains safety and efficacy data about the investigational product, which is provided by the sponsor to investigators and IECs. All these documents are part of the broader framework outlined in the Indian Guidelines on Clinical Research. They help streamline the process, maintain regulatory compliance, and prioritize participant safety, key themes that underpin the entire clinical trial process under the NDCT Rules 2019. Let's take a closer look at the evolving regulatory landscape from 2020 to 2025. Over these years, we've seen significant initiatives aimed at streamlining clinical research and making the process more efficient. For instance, in 2020, the introduction of Indian Guidelines for Clinical Research set a solid foundation. Moving forward, 2021 brought in expedited pathways for COVID-19 vaccines and drugs, which was critical during the pandemic. In 2022, new requirements mandated that all bioavailability and bioequivalence testing sites be registered with the CDSCO, making inspections mandatory to ensure quality. By 2023, we saw the draft rules for protecting health data generated during clinical trials, emphasizing data privacy and security. Fast forward to 2024, the focus shifted to simplifying the review process for new molecular entities of Indian origin, with faster timelines and waiver options for Phase I trials. And in 2025, a draft guidance was proposed on using AI and machine learning in clinical trials, covering patient recruitment, safety monitoring, and data analysis, highlighting the move towards digital and innovative approaches. Throughout this period, we've seen a clear trend. Efforts to accelerate development, strengthen regulation, and incorporate new technologies, all aimed at making clinical research more efficient, safe, and patient-centric. Let's explore the key aspects of India's clinical research framework. First, it's important to note that registration with the Clinical Trials Registry of India, or CTRI, is mandatory before enrolling the first participant in any clinical trial. This ensures transparency and proper documentation from the outset. Next, a significant and unique reform in Indian regulation is the mandatory compensation for serious adverse events, or SAEs, and trial-related injuries. This change underscores our commitment to participant safety and sets a strong precedent in clinical research standards. Moving on, compliance with good clinical practice guidelines, specifically ICH-GCP E6, R2, is not optional. All data collection and documentation must adhere to the ALCOA Plus principles, which emphasize data integrity, accuracy, and reliability throughout the trial process. Informed consent remains the cornerstone of ethical research. Recent updates now make audio-visual documentation of consent mandatory, especially for vulnerable groups, to further safeguard participant rights and ensure clear communication. At the regulatory level, the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, or CDSCO, acts as the primary regulator overseeing clinical trials. Ethical oversight is provided by institutional ethics committees, or IRBs, while the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, offers the overarching ethical framework guiding research conduct. The foundation of all these measures is the NDCT Rules of 2019, which replaced the older schedule. Why these rules modernized our legal framework, providing a comprehensive and clear set of standards for clinical trials in India. Ultimately, India's clinical research framework integrates science, ethics, and regulatory compliance. This holistic approach aims to promote high-quality, ethical research that safeguards participants while fostering innovation. Thank you so much for your time and attention throughout this presentation. If you found the content helpful and want to stay updated on clinical research and trials, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel for more videos on these topics. You can also follow my Instagram page at @ClinicalResearch23 for additional insights and updates. I truly appreciate your support. Thank you again, and I look forward to connecting with you in future content.